Sandra Birchmore was a 23-year-old young woman with a difficult upbringing. She lost her parents early, and growing up in the foster care system left her longing for connection and stability. Her vulnerability made her an easy target for manipulation. She trusted the wrong people, police officers who exploited her trust rather than protecting her. Sandra's life came to an abrupt and tragic end in February 2021 when she was found dead in her apartment in Canton, Massachusetts. But her death wasn't just a sad accident. It was part of a deeply disturbing case of corruption, betrayal, and abuse by those who swore to serve and protect. What makes this case so horrifying is the role the police played, not just in her exploitation, but in covering up their crimes. Sandra's story is a stark reminder of what happens when power is abused and accountability is absent, groomed by those she trusted. Sandra's connection to the police began when she was a teenager. She was enrolled in a police-sponsored youth program where she met several officers, including Matthew Farwell, who would later become a central figure in her life and her death. Farwell and other officers were meant to be mentors, but instead, they groomed Sandra. Over time, Farwell engaged in an inappropriate relationship with her that began when she was underage and continued for years. As Sandra grew older, the manipulation only deepened. She believed she had found someone who cared for her, but in reality, Farwell and others were exploiting her emotionally and sexually. Sandra confided in these officers, thinking they were her protectors, but they preyed on her vulnerability, creating a toxic web of dependency and abuse that would ultimately lead to her tragic death. A system that enables corruption. The officers involved in Sandra's case used their positions of power to exploit her, but the problem goes beyond individual actions. This case reveals a deeply troubling pattern of systemic corruption within the police force. When Sandra's death raised questions, the initial response wasn't to seek justice, it was to protect the reputations of the officers involved. The thin blue line, a phrase often used to describe police solidarity, took on a sinister meaning here. Instead of coming forward, officers closed ranks to shield their own. Evidence was ignored, details were downplayed, and accountability was pushed aside. This culture of protecting fellow officers, even when they commit heinous crimes, not only undermines trust in law enforcement, but also enables such abuses to continue unchecked. Sandra's story is a chilling example of how systems designed to protect citizens can instead become tools of exploitation. The day Sandra died. On February 4, 2021, Sandra was found unresponsive in her apartment. Her death was initially ruled a suicide, but the circumstances surrounding it were far from straightforward. In the days leading up to her death, Sandra had reportedly been in contact with Matthew Farwell, who had recently broken off their relationship. Her final messages painted a picture of heartbreak and despair, revealing the depth of her emotional dependency on Farwell. However, what makes this case even more disturbing is how the investigation into her death was handled. Instead of conducting a thorough and unbiased inquiry, critical evidence was overlooked and potential witnesses were ignored. The officers involved were treated with leniency, and the focus seemed to shift away from finding the truth to protecting those implicated. Sandra's death raised more questions than answers, but one thing became clear: justice was not being served. Officers implicated. The spotlight, in this case, falls on Matthew Farwell, the officer who manipulated Sandra for years. However, he wasn't the only one involved. Several other officers from the Stoughton Police Department were implicated in inappropriate behavior with Sandra. Some were accused of having inappropriate relationships with her, while others turned a blind eye to what was happening. This wasn't the failure of one bad apple. It was a collective failure. The behavior of these officers ranged from predatory to complicit, and their actions, or lack thereof, created an environment where Sandra was isolated and exploited. Yet even as allegations surfaced, the system appeared more interested in protecting the reputations of these officers than in delivering justice. This case forces us to question how such individuals were allowed to wear the badge in the first place. The role of cover-ups. One of the most disturbing aspects of Sandra's case is the way evidence was seemingly swept under the rug. When questions arose about her death, instead of pursuing the truth, there were attempts to minimize the involvement of the officers implicated. Reports suggest that some officers downplayed their connections to Sandra, while others withheld key information. Even the initial ruling of suicide seemed premature, given the suspicious circumstances surrounding her death. The culture of silence within the police force played a critical role here. Officers who should have come forward chose loyalty to their colleagues over their duty to the public. This cover-up not only denied Sandra justice, but also highlighted a glaring issue in law enforcement: how easily power can be used to evade accountability. Sandra's family fights for justice. While the system failed Sandra, her family has refused to let her story be forgotten. They've tirelessly advocated for a deeper investigation, exposing the negligence and corruption surrounding her case. Her family has consistently questioned the official narrative, pointing to the inappropriate relationships Sandra had with the officers and the lack of transparency in the investigation. Their efforts have brought national attention to the case, pointing pressure on authorities to take action. They've also become vocal critics of the culture within law enforcement that allows such abuses to happen. Sandra's family isn't just fighting for her, they're fighting to ensure no one else suffers the same fate. Their resilience is a testament to the power of love and justice in the face of systemic corruption. The ripple effect on trust. Sandra Birchmore's case has done more than expose individual acts of corruption. It has shaken public trust in law enforcement. Stories like hers make people question whether the police can truly be trusted to protect the vulnerable. When those in power abuse their authority, it sends a chilling message. Justice isn't guaranteed for everyone. This case is particularly damaging because it involves not just one rogue officer, but an entire system that appeared more concerned with protecting its image than with seeking the truth. Public outrage over Sandra's death has sparked conversations about the need for greater oversight and accountability in law enforcement. If trust is to be rebuilt, systemic changes are necessary. Changes that ensure officers are held to the highest standards of integrity and that victims like Sandra aren't silenced or forgotten. What can be done? Sandra Birchmore's tragic story serves as a wake-up call for the urgent need to reform law enforcement systems. First and foremost, there must be greater accountability for officers who abuse their power. Independent investigations into police misconduct are essential to ensure cases like Sandra's are handled fairly and transparently. Additionally, programs meant to connect officers with the community, like the youth program Sandra attended, need stricter oversight to prevent exploitation. Training and education are also critical, emphasizing ethics, respect, and the responsibility that comes with wearing a badge. Finally, fostering a culture that encourages whistleblowing without fear of retaliation can help break the code of silence. Sandra's story is a heartbreaking reminder of what's at stake when power goes unchecked. It's up to us to demand a system that prioritizes justice over loyalty to the corrupt. Sandra Birchmore's story is one of betrayal, corruption, and a system that failed her at every turn. But it's also a call to action. Her tragic death exposes the dark side of unchecked power and reminds us of the importance of accountability in law enforcement. Let her story be a catalyst for change, a reminder that we must demand better from those who swear to protect us. If this video moved you, take a moment to share Sandra's story so her voice isn't silenced. Subscribe to our channel for more content that uncovers the truths others try to hide. Together, we can shine a light on injustice and demand accountability. Justice for Sandra starts with us.